The room was thick with cigarette smoke and the weight of history being written in real time. Moscow, 1924. Vladimir Lenin, the architect of the Bolshevik Revolution, the man who had turned an empire into a socialist experiment, lay dying in his secluded dacha in Gorky. His brain, ravaged by strokes, was shutting down. And in the Kremlin, in the shadowed corridors of power where ideology met ambition, two men were already circling each other like wolves in winter. Leon Trotsky, Joseph Stalin. One was a brilliant orator, a strategist of revolutionary warfare, a Marxist intellectual who had commanded the Red Army to victory against impossible odds. The other was a quiet, methodical bureaucrat, a man who rarely spoke in public, who seemed unremarkable, even dull. A man whose greatest skill was not in speeches or theory, but in the silent, patient accumulation of control. History would remember this as a battle between genius and mediocrity. But that narrative is a lie, because Stalin didn't defeat Trotsky through luck or circumstance. He defeated him through a mastery of power that Trotsky, for all his brilliance, never truly understood. This is not a story about who was smarter. Intelligence in the ruthless calculus of political survival is often a liability. This is a story about how power works, about the invisible mechanisms that determine who rises and who falls, about the fatal gap between intellectual superiority and political instinct, about the difference between being right and being in control. Trotsky believed ideas could change the world. Stalin understood that the world is changed by those who control the levers of power, and in that fundamental difference lay the entire tragedy. Leon Trotsky was born Lev Davidovich Bronstein in 1879 into a Jewish family in southern Ukraine. From his youth, he was marked by a kind of restless, burning intelligence, the type that devours books, questions everything, and seeks grand theories to explain the chaos of existence. He joined the revolutionary movement as a teenager, was arrested, exiled to Siberia, escaped using a forged passport with the name Trotsky, and never looked back. By the time of the 1917 revolution, Trotsky had become one of the most formidable figures in the Bolshevik leadership. He was the chairman of the Petrograd Soviet, the organizational mastermind behind the October Revolution, and, most crucially, the founder and commander of the Red Army. During the Russian Civil War, Trotsky traveled the front lines in his armored train, rallying troops, executing deserters, and transforming a ragged collection of peasants and workers into a disciplined fighting force that crushed the White Army and secured Bolshevik rule. He was charismatic, passionate, a man who could electrify a crowd with his words. Lenin once called him the most able man in the Central Committee. Trotsky wrote with the ferocity of a prophet. He theorized about permanent revolution, about internationalism, about the inevitability of global socialism. He was by every measure the natural successor to Lenin. But natural succession means nothing in a world where power is seized, not inherited. Joseph Stalin was born Isob Bessaranius Jugashvili in 1878 in the impoverished town of Gori, Georgia. His father was a violent alcoholic. His mother, a washerwoman who dreamed her son would become a priest. Stalin's childhood was brutal, marked by poverty, beatings, and a smallpox infection that left his face scarred for life. He was short, rough-featured, with a withered left arm from a childhood accident. He spoke Russian with a thick Georgian accent. He was not someone people naturally followed. What Stalin lacked in charisma, he compensated for something far more dangerous: patience, ruthlessness, and an almost supernatural understanding of human weakness. While Trotsky dazzled audiences with speeches about dialectical materialism, Stalin was doing something far more mundane and far more effective. He was building a machine. As General Secretary of the Communist Party, a position most considered administrative, even boring, Stalin controlled appointments, promotions, and party membership. He decided who got posted where, who received privileges, who was promoted or depromoted. He built networks of loyalty, placed his people in key positions, and quietly constructed a bureaucratic apparatus that owed everything to him. Trotsky saw himself as a revolutionary theorist. Stalin saw himself as a manager of power, and in the struggle that was coming, management would prove far more lethal than theory. When Lenin's health began to fail in 1922, the question of succession became urgent.
Lenin himself was deeply troubled. In his final writings, later known as Lenin's Testament, he warned the party about Stalin's growing power. Quote, "Comrade Stalin," Lenin wrote, "has concentrated unlimited authority in his hands, and I am not sure that he always knows how to use that power with sufficient caution." Lenin recommended that Stalin be removed from his position as general secretary. But Lenin's warning came too late, and critically, Trotsky failed to act on it. He didn't rally support, didn't move against Stalin when he had the chance, didn't weaponize Lenin's words to destroy his rival. Perhaps he thought the ideas would speak for themselves. Perhaps he believed the party would naturally choose the most capable leader. Perhaps in his intellectual arrogance, he underestimated the quiet man from Georgia. It was a fatal miscalculation, because while Trotsky debated theory, Stalin was consolidating control. He formed alliances with key figures, Grigory Zinoviev, Lev Kamenev, men who feared Trotsky's brilliance and saw Stalin as a useful counterweight. Together, they formed a triumvirate, a temporary coalition built not on ideology, but on mutual interest, stopping Trotsky. Stalin understood something Trotsky never did. In politics, enemies are temporary, but structures of power are permanent. You don't need to be loved. You don't need to be the smartest man in the room. You just need to control the room itself. And Stalin, through his mastery of the party bureaucracy, controlled everything that mattered. By 1924, when Lenin finally died, the battle lines were already drawn. But Trotsky didn't realize he had already lost.
Power is not seized in a single dramatic moment. It is accumulated in silence, brick by brick, favor by favor, until the structure is so complete that resistance becomes impossible. Stalin understood this. Trotsky did not. In the months following Lenin's death, the Soviet Union entered a period of collective leadership, at least in appearance. The Politburo, the highest decision-making body of the Communist Party, was supposed to govern together. But beneath the surface, Stalin was orchestrating a campaign of such surgical precision that by the time his rivals understood what was happening, it was already too late to stop him. The first phase of Stalin's strategy was deceptively simple: isolation. Trotsky's greatest strength was also his greatest vulnerability. He was an outsider, a Jew in a party increasingly dominated by Russian nationalists, a latecomer to Bolshevism. He had only joined Lenin's faction in 1917, after years of criticizing the Bolsheviks from the sidelines. An intellectual in a movement that was becoming suspicious of intellectuals. A cosmopolitan revolutionary who spoke of world revolution while most party members were exhausted from civil war and wanted to focus on building socialism at home. Stalin weaponized every single one of these facts. He didn't attack Trotsky directly, not at first. That would have been too obvious, too crude. Instead, he allowed others to do it for him. Zinoviev and Kamenev, Trotsky's rivals in the triumvirate, began publicly questioning Trotsky's loyalty to Lenin's legacy. They dug up old articles where Trotsky had criticized Lenin before 1917. They framed his theory of permanent revolution as a deviation from Leninist orthodoxy. They whispered about his arrogance, his inability to work as part of a collective, his Jewish origins. And Stalin? Stalin said nothing. He positioned himself as the moderate, the voice of reason, the loyal disciple of Lenin who only wanted unity and stability. He let others bloody their hands, while he remained clean. This is a fundamental principle of authoritarian consolidation. Let your enemies destroy each other, then step in as the peacemaker. Trotsky, for all his intelligence, fell into every trap. He responded to accusations with long, dense theoretical treatises. He wrote essays explaining why his critics misunderstood Marxism, why permanent revolution was actually consistent with Lenin's thought, why he was right and they were wrong. He was brilliant, he was correct, and he was losing. Because the battle was never about who was right. It was about who could mobilize the party apparatus, who could distribute patronage, who could make people feel that their careers depended on loyalty. And in that contest, Trotsky was outmatched from the beginning. Stalin's second tactic was control of narrative. In 1924, Stalin delivered a series of lectures at Sverdlov University titled The Foundations of Leninism. They were published and distributed throughout the party. The lectures were unremarkable in their content, derivative, simplistic restatements of Lenin's ideas, but that was precisely the point. Stalin was positioning himself as the authoritative interpreter of Leninism, the guardian of ideological purity. He didn't need to be original, he needed to be orthodox. And orthodoxy, in a revolutionary movement that had just lost its prophet, was the most valuable currency imaginable. Trotsky, by contrast, was seen as a revisionist, an innovator,
someone whose ideas were too complex, too foreign, too radical. Stalin encouraged this perception. He published articles under pseudonyms attacking Trotskyism as a dangerous deviation. He organized study circles where party members were taught that Trotsky's theories were incompatible with true Leninism. He created an entire mythology in which Trotsky was cast as the heretic and Stalin as the faithful defender of the revolution. And here is where Trotsky made his most catastrophic error. He refused to fight dirty. Trotsky believed in the power of ideas, in rational debate, in the inherent intelligence of the working class. He thought that if he could just explain his position clearly enough, if he could just demonstrate the logical superiority of his arguments, the party would naturally side with him. He thought politics was a debate club where the best argument wins. Stalin knew it was a knife fight in the dark. When Stalin's agents began spreading rumors about Trotsky, that he was plotting a coup, that he was disloyal, that he was secretly sympathetic to the bourgeoisie, Trotsky responded with indignation and appeals to party discipline. He could have mobilized the Red Army, which still revered him. He could have leaked Lenin's testament to the public, exposing Stalin's authoritarian tendencies. He could have built his own network of loyalists, distributed patronage, played the same game Stalin was playing. He did none of these things, because doing so would have meant abandoning his principles, descending into what he saw as petty bureaucratic infighting. Trotsky wanted to be right. Stalin wanted to win. By 1925, the triumvirate began to fracture. Zinoviev and Kamenev, having helped Stalin isolate Trotsky, suddenly realized they had created a monster. Stalin's power had grown far beyond what they had anticipated. He controlled the party apparatus, the security services, the levers of state power. And now that Trotsky was neutralized, Stalin no longer needed his former allies. Zinoviev and Kamenev tried to reverse course. They formed a united opposition with Trotsky, warning the party about Stalin's authoritarian drift. They accused him of betraying the revolution, of building a personal dictatorship, of abandoning world revolution in favor of socialism in one country, Stalin's newly articulated doctrine that the Soviet Union could build socialism without waiting for revolutions elsewhere. It was too late. Stalin had already won. The final act of Trotsky's political destruction came in 1927. At the 15th Party Congress, the united opposition was formally expelled from the Communist Party. Trotsky, the man who had led the October Revolution, who had built the Red Army, who had been Lenin's right hand, was cast out. His followers were purged from their positions. His writings were banned. His name was erased from official histories of the revolution. And Stalin? Stalin stood before the Congress and delivered a speech dripping with false modesty, claiming he had no personal ambitions, that he only wanted to serve the party, that unity was more important than individual brilliance. The delegates applauded. They had no choice. By then, nearly every person in that room owed their position to Stalin. He had appointed them, promoted them, protected them. They were not voting based on ideology or competence. They were voting for survival. Trotsky was exiled to Alma-Ata in Kazakhstan in 1928, then expelled from the Soviet Union entirely in 1929. He spent the rest of his life in exile, moving from Turkey to France to Norway to Mexico, writing furiously, trying to explain what had gone wrong, warning the world about Stalin's betrayal of the revolution. He founded the Fourth International, hoping to keep the flame of true Marxism alive. He wrote The Revolution Betrayed, a devastating critique of Stalinism. But none of it mattered. He was screaming into the void. Stalin had not just defeated him politically, he had erased him from history itself. Soviet textbooks rewrote the story of the revolution, minimizing Trotsky's role, inflating Stalin's. Photographs were doctored to remove Trotsky from images of key revolutionary moments. His name became synonymous with treason. And Trotsky, even in exile, still didn't fully understand what had happened. He believed he had lost because the revolution had degenerated, because the bureaucracy had betrayed socialist ideals, because the working class had been exhausted by war and famine. All of this was true, but it was not the whole truth. The deeper truth was simpler and brutal. Trotsky lost because he never understood that intelligence without power is just noise, and principles without tactics are just suicide.
By 1929, Stalin had achieved something unprecedented in the history of revolutionary movements: total control. He was not just the leader of the Communist Party, he was the party. Every institution, every lever of power, every mechanism of the Soviet state had been bent to his will. And he had done it without firing a shot, without leading a single military campaign, without ever commanding the adoration that Trotsky once inspired. He had done it through bureaucracy, through patience, through an understanding of human nature so cold and precise it was almost sociopathic. But the question remains, why did Trotsky lose? Not just tactically, but fundamentally, what was the fatal flaw in his approach to power that made his defeat inevitable? The answer lies in a paradox that has destroyed countless brilliant people throughout history. Trotsky was too smart for his own good. Intelligence in the realm of politics is a double-edged sword. It allows you to see complexities that others miss, to understand systems in their totality, to grasp the deeper currents of history. But it also breeds a dangerous kind of arrogance, the belief that because you understand something intellectually, you can control it politically, that because your analysis is correct, reality will eventually conform to it. Trotsky lived in the world of ideas. He believed that history moved according to laws, dialectical materialism, class struggle, the inevitable march towards socialism. He thought that if you understood these laws, if you positioned yourself correctly within the historical process, victory would follow naturally. He saw himself not as a politician, but as a revolutionary scientist, someone who had discovered the formula for social transformation and was merely applying it. Stalin lived in the world of flesh and blood. He understood that history is not made by laws, but by men, fallible, fearful, ambitious men who can be manipulated, bought, threatened, or destroyed. He knew that ideas are only as powerful as the institutions that enforce them, and institutions are only as loyal as the people who staff them. Trotsky wrote about the dictatorship of the proletariat. Stalin built it. And in building it, Stalin revealed something dark and essential about the nature of power. It is not rational. It does not flow to the most intelligent or the most morally correct. It flows to those who are willing to do whatever is necessary to accumulate it, to those who understand that politics is not a debate but a war, and in war, the side that hesitates loses. Consider the critical moments where Trotsky could have stopped Stalin and didn't. In 1923, when Lenin's testament was read to the Central Committee recommending Stalin's removal, Trotsky remained silent. He could have demanded Stalin's ouster. He could have rallied the old Bolsheviks, the veterans of the revolution who still remembered his leadership during the Civil War. Instead, he allowed Zinoviev and Kamenev to suppress the document, believing that Stalin was a temporary problem, that the party would eventually see through him. In 1924, when Stalin began consolidating control of the party apparatus, Trotsky was preoccupied with theoretical disputes about the nature of socialism and the role of the peasantry. He wrote dense economic analyses while Stalin was making quiet deals with regional party bosses, promising them autonomy and resources in exchange for loyalty. In 1926, when the united opposition finally formed, it was already too late. Stalin controlled the party machinery, the secret police, the military command structure. Trotsky's alliance with Zinoviev and Kamenev was an alliance of the desperate, three drowning men grabbing at each other in the hope that somehow their combined weight would keep them afloat. Each time, Trotsky chose principles over pragmatism, and each time he lost ground. This is not to say that Trotsky was naive. He understood power. He had wielded it ruthlessly during the Civil War, ordering executions, crushing peasant rebellions, building a disciplined military machine through sheer force of will. But he understood power in the context of open conflict, of armies and battlefields, where the enemy is visible and the objective is clear. He did not understand power in the context of bureaucratic maneuvering, of patronage networks, of the slow, patient accumulation of institutional control. He saw these things as beneath him, as distractions from the real work of building socialism, and that contempt was his undoing. Stalin, by contrast, had no such illusions. He was not an ideologue. His commitment to Marxism was instrumental, not philosophical. He used ideology as a tool to justify his actions, to discredit his enemies, to mobilize the masses when necessary. But he never confused ideas with reality. He knew that power was not about having the correct theory. It was about controlling the institutions that turned theory into practice. Stalin's doctrine of socialism in one country was a perfect example of this. It was not a particularly sophisticated idea. In fact, it contradicted much of Marxist orthodoxy, which held that socialism could only succeed through international revolution. But it was politically brilliant. It appealed to the exhausted Soviet population, who wanted to focus on rebuilding their own country rather than exporting revolution. It positioned Stalin as a practical leader, someone who cared about real results rather than abstract theories. And it framed Trotsky's internationalism as reckless, as putting the survival of the Soviet Union at risk for the sake of global ambitions. Was it theoretically correct? Perhaps not, but it won, and in politics, winning is the only truth that matters. Trotsky's exile in 1929 was not the end of Stalin's revenge. It was only the beginning. Throughout the 1930s, as Stalin consolidated his dictatorship and launched the Great Purge, he remained obsessed with Trotsky.
Even though Trotsky was thousands of miles away, living in poverty, politically irrelevant, Stalin could not let him go. He saw Trotsky as the last living symbol of the old Bolsheviks, the revolutionary idealists who might one day challenge his authority. Stalin ordered the NKVD, his secret police, to infiltrate Trotsky's circle, to monitor his movements, to discredit him through propaganda. Soviet newspapers ran endless articles denouncing Trotskyite wreckers and enemies of the people. During the Moscow show trials, dozens of old Bolsheviks were forced to confess, under torture, that they had conspired with Trotsky to overthrow Stalin and restore capitalism. These confessions were absurd, transparently fabricated, but they served a purpose. They allowed Stalin to purge anyone who might have independent loyalties, anyone who remembered a time before Stalin's total dominance. They turned Trotsky into a mythical villain, a traitor so dangerous that his very name justified mass executions. Trotsky's intelligence had become a weapon in Stalin's hands. In August 1940, in a quiet house in Coyoacan, Mexico, the final act played out. A man named Ramon Mercader, an NKVD agent who had infiltrated Trotsky's inner circle under a false identity, walked into Trotsky's study with an ice axe hidden under his coat. Trotsky was reviewing an article Mercader had written. The assassin struck him in the head. Trotsky survived for another day, conscious, coherent, knowing exactly what had happened and who had ordered it. His last words, addressed to his wife, were, "I will not survive this attack. Stalin has finally accomplished the task he attempted unsuccessfully before." He died on August 21, 1940. He was 60 years old. Stalin had won, completely, totally, forever.